In the early 1950s, the Pierre Saint-Martin Massif in the western Pyrenees became one of the most intriguing places for European cavers. High on the mountain, water vanished into cracks in the limestone and later emerged far below as powerful springs. To cavers, that meant the mountain might contain a deep hidden system. If they could find a way in and follow it downward, they had a chance to reach depths no one had reached before. The story of the discovery began in the summer of 1950, when a small group of explorers was searching across the cracked limestone plateau of the Pierre Saint-Martin Massif. Among them was the French caver Gouffre Lépineux. While moving through the rocks, he noticed a narrow vertical fissure that was almost invisible from the surface, but a distinct current of cold underground air was coming out of it. When Lépineux dropped a stone into the opening, the sound of it striking the walls continued for an unusually long time, before fading somewhere far below into the darkness. Measurements with a simple plumb line showed that this narrow shaft was more than 1,000 feet deep. Later, the entrance would be named after him, Gouffre Lépineux. Just 1 year later, in 1951, a reconnaissance expedition returned to the fissure under the technical direction of the Belgian physicist Max Cossens. For the first descent, the team used a special pedal-driven mechanical winch. A caver was lowered in a harness on a steel cable, while the members of the expedition on the surface operated the mechanism by hand. The cavers managed to reach the bottom of the shaft for the first time, and it immediately became clear that Gouffre Lépineux was only the entrance to a much larger system. Beyond it were vast chambers and galleries that continued deeper into the massif. But that first descent also showed the limits of the method. Gouffre Lépineux was more than 1,000 feet deep, almost the height of the Eiffel Tower, and the pedal-driven winch was slow, exhausting, and difficult to rely on for a larger expedition. If the team wanted to send more people and equipment down into the system, they needed a faster and more powerful way to lower and raise them. So for the next expedition, Max Cossens designed a new setup, an electric winch mounted on a steel frame above the entrance and powered by a gasoline generator. The caver was lowered and raised in a harness connected to a specially ordered steel cable. The cable carried the full weight of the person, and it also contained a copper telephone wire inside it. Through that wire, the caver could speak with the surface team during the descent or ascent. The expedition began in the first half of August 1952. On the high mountain plateau, near the entrance to Gouffre Lépineux, the team set up a large expedition camp. The first descents using the electric winch were successful, and the new system appeared to work as intended. One after another, Marcel Loubens and other members of the expedition were lowered to the bottom of the shaft. The first days were tense, but successful. At the base of the entrance shaft, the team established an underground bivouac, explored vast chambers and galleries, and began studying an underground river that continued deeper into the massif. The cavers had spent several days underground, and by August 13th, the extreme working conditions and constant humidity were beginning to take a serious toll. Marcel Loubens had completed his part of the work and was supposed to be the first to return to the surface. Above him, however, the weather was beginning to deteriorate. Clouds were gathering over the plateau, warning of a strong Pyrenean storm, and despite the first signs of technical trouble with the winch and the cable attachment, the decision was made to begin Marcel's ascent. He secured himself in the parachute-style harness and reported through the telephone line that he was ready to be raised. The winch started up on the surface, the steel cable tightened, and Loubens began slowly rising from the base of the shaft. The accident happened almost immediately. The clamp connecting the steel cable to his harness suddenly failed, and although the cable itself remained intact, the attachment came loose, instantly disconnecting him from the lifting system. Loubens crashed onto the rocky slope at the base of the vertical shaft. The fall itself was only about 30 feet, but he struck a steep scree slope, landed among loose rocks, and then tumbled another 100 feet down the stone incline, before finally coming to rest among the boulders. When his companions reached him, he was unconscious. Loubens had suffered severe injuries to his head, spine, and limbs, and the first priority was to move him off the sloping scree, where his body would continue to lose heat and where it would be almost impossible to give him any meaningful help. They built an improvised stretcher from materials at hand and carried Marcel Loubens off the rocky slope to a flatter area between the base of the shaft and the underground bivouac. Another immediate problem was communication with the surface. The telephone wire ran inside the same steel cable, so after the accident, the rescuers had to restore both the lifting system and the communication line. The work took several hours. While the men underground tried to help Loubens, the rescue operation was also unfolding on the surface. The team had to restore the system, call for a doctor, and prepare for the evacuation. The location of Gouffre Lépineux made everything even more difficult. The entrance lay high in the mountains on a rocky karst plateau, and every piece of equipment, from stretchers to ladder sections and communication gear, had to be brought to the mouth of the shaft across rough mountain terrain while the weather on the plateau continued to worsen. Dr. André Maillet was only able to reach Marcel Loubens about a day after the accident. For his descent, the cable attachment was reinforced with several clamps. He examined Loubens and found his condition extremely serious. Loubens was in a deep coma with multiple injuries, and there was almost no chance that he would survive the ascent. Even so, Marcel still had to be prepared for evacuation because there was no other way to help him. At the same time, the team on the surface began preparing a backup evacuation plan. The single lifting system could no longer be fully trusted, so a group of scout cavers from Lyon, who were already in the Pierre Saint-Martin area and had experience with deep vertical caves, were brought into the operation. Their task was to descend on ladders along the walls of the entrance shaft, take positions at intermediate points, and help guide the stretcher during the ascent. But while the evacuation was being prepared, a violent Pyrenean storm broke over the plateau. The camp at the entrance to Gouffre Lépineux was in an extremely vulnerable position. The winch stood outside on a metal frame, the steel cable ran nearby, and electrical equipment was in use. Any new failure could stop the preparation for the ascent and leave the people underground without communication at the most dangerous moment of the operation. And that is exactly what happened. Most likely because of lightning or damage to the telephone circuit, communication failed for almost 15 hours, leaving the underground team cut off from the surface once again. Roughly 36 hours after the fall, communication had been restored, and the preparations for the ascent were almost complete. Marcel Loubens had been secured to the stretcher. The scouts and rescuers were already in position on the ladders and intermediate ledges inside the shaft, while the team on the surface waited for the moment when the ascent could begin. But Loubens' condition remained critical. At around 10 p.m., before the ascent could begin, he gave a faint moan and died. After Loubens' death, the expedition decided not to attempt to bring his body back to the surface. Too many people were still underground, and the risk of another accident was too high. Marcel Loubens was temporarily buried at the bottom of Gouffre Lépineux. The team returned to the fissure only 2 years later, in August 1954. For that operation, a new lifting system was prepared, and Marcel Loubens' body was placed inside an aluminum container made specifically for the ascent. And so, 2 years after the tragedy, Marcel Loubens finally returned to the surface and was buried in Mazères-sur-Salatte. The tragedy of 1952 showed how dangerous it was to depend on a single lifting system. After Pierre Saint-Martin, cavers paid much closer attention to backup lines, evacuation plans, and organized cave rescue. In France, these ideas later developed into structures such as speleo seekers. If you're interested in more real underground incidents and step-by-step reconstructions, subscribe to Vaughan Reconstructs. There are many more cases ahead. Take care, and thanks for watching.